Now, Lincoln's Morning News on Lincoln's News and Talk, 1400 KLIN.
7:44 on Lincoln's Morning News. Jack and Ashley, Mark Halverson in studio with us. Good morning, Mark.
Hey, glad to be here.
51 degrees right now, looking at a high of 78 degrees, sunny skies. It's going to be a beautiful mid-September day. Right now, we're joined by Mike Morrissey from Baby Safe New England. There's been so much talk about these Baby Safe Haven New England. There's been so much talk about these safe haven laws here in the state, and now at the city level. We thought we'd bring Mike on as he's got some role here, what's happening in Nebraska, all the way out there from New England. Mike, good morning. How are you doing?
Well, good morning, Jack. Jack, how are you?
Doing very well. Now, Mike, first of all, let's start off. Just tell us a little bit about what you and the organization does.
Well, my wife and I were called in right after November 1 of 2001 by the state of Massachusetts to help bury a little baby that was found lying dead in a cemetery, about a 200-year-old cemetery here in Boston, because they couldn't do the burial. States don't do that. They have to bring in a private organization. And we started fighting to get our safe haven law passed in Massachusetts. Took us about 3 years to get it done. It had been in the legislature stalled for a year. And in the meantime, we helped pass laws in New Hampshire and then worked with Vermont to get their law passed last year. Just came back from Hawaii helping get their law passed. We kind of found a niche in getting safe haven laws passed and also making sure that they work properly.
And it's my understanding that there are now these laws in 48 states. Only Nebraska and Alaska are currently without them. So how have you become involved with the effort here in Nebraska and even in Lincoln itself?
Well, what happened was after passing in Hawaii, we began to hear more and more from people in Nebraska and specific individuals through the National Safe Haven Alliance. It's people like myself and groups around the country that work with their safe haven laws in their areas or states. And Deanna Weeks had contacted some people with the National Safe Haven Alliance asking what she could do, and one of the answers was let's replicate what took place in Mobile, Alabama, which was the first safe haven location in the country, and that was basically a county-wide ordinance, to here in Massachusetts where we passed 25 city and town ordinances ahead of the state of Massachusetts. And because basically you're in a situation where if this were some type of a health area, a communicable rare disease, you'd be in a state of crisis in Nebraska right now with having 3 newborns abandoned in about a 3-5 month period. That's actually, for a state your size of about 1.5 million people, that's a lot. That's a problem area. So the most that can be done to assure that kind of effect changes is to put one of these laws into effect as fast as possible.
And I'm curious, you and I talked about that a little bit when we spoke on the phone earlier this week. Those 3 cases, is that something that you've seen with frequency around the nation in that kind of a time period? Because you've kind of got your pulse on what's been going on with this.
Yeah, not for a state that size. I can compare it directly to 2 states right here in New England that I work with. New Hampshire has had, since their law passed 3 years ago or 4 years ago, they haven't had a single abandonment and or a baby surrendered at a safe haven in 4 years. Rhode Island's had their safe haven law for almost 6 years, and they've only had 1 baby safely surrendered and no babies abandoned in that same time period. And those are about equal in population to Nebraska. So and I don't think it's unusual because everybody knows, births are illogical in some way. There isn't really a pattern. But if you start to see something of this nature, that's something that obviously deserves a lot of attention, and there's something that can be rectified by putting a safe haven law in place.
Sure. We're talking with Mike Morrissey from Baby Safe Haven New England, and just a little background also, we were referring to a couple of cases, even recently, one in Lincoln, one in Omaha, where young mothers, one of them came into a bathroom and left a baby there at a hospital in Omaha, and another situation where a woman in Lincoln left the hospital after her baby was born without the baby. No charges were filed in Omaha. In Lincoln, I believe the woman was given a citation, and I think the prosecutors are offering pretrial diversion in that case. So, but tell us about, I guess, the tactic of going before local authorities or municipal authorities, as Deanna Weeks did on Monday, kind of as apart from an effort of the entire state law. Tell us about that tactic and how it's worked other places.
Well, it started, again, in Mobile, Alabama, because a TV reporter got tired of covering stories of babies being abandoned there. These things tend to happen in strings of 3, 4, and at that point it had been 12 or 13. And so she went to the Mobile County District Attorney and said, if a woman brings the baby into a hospital and walks away, will you prosecute? He said no, and a safe haven law went into place. That was done on the local level. Similar situation in New York City. It started right out of Brooklyn and Long Island. So this is something that's been done locally first in many communities, and Boston in doing that. I'll say, yes, it is pressure on the legislature to get it done, but here's a point where, government is the voice of the people. And if the people go right to their own city councils or state or municipal governments and say, hey, it's time that we get this done, because these babies that are born is the absolute definition of the most vulnerable citizen in your state, is a baby that's taking its first breaths. So at that point, every single government should do everything in its power to do everything to assure that baby its life and its liberty and its pursuit of happiness, or even just getting its next breath in. So even if that comes down to a local level, that's exactly what governments should do. So I don't think it's an unusual situation for any citizen, from Deanna Weeks to myself when we went to my hometown here in Lexington, to anybody else, to go to their local government and say, what can we do? And let's do absolutely the most that we can do, even if it's just here.
Now, when we talk about enacting laws at the local level, especially when it pertains to some of the criminal state statutes, there's a lot of state and local intergovernmental legal issues that crop up. I understand our city council, the Lincoln City Council, was told by the city attorney that the city can't grant immunity from state prosecution under the state statutes. Did you run into those issues in some of the other localities where you worked on this before there was an actual state law?
Some localities, it depends on the constitution of each specific state, in that in some places a district attorney for the area can choose whether or not to prosecute, and it may actually come to a point that a legal authority such as a district attorney may take what's called a non-prosecutorial stance under specific situations. Basically what they're doing is redefining or re-promulgating regulations as to what is available to prosecute criminal aspect of that law. So that's a potential of they'll redefine the criminality of the statute. On other areas, the local authority can rewrite the law in its own area, because obviously they'll cover it on areas such as parking and so forth. I believe in Nebraska, in this instance, comes under a misdemeanor statute, which may potentially be able to be redefined by the local government.
Well, Mike, I'd like to talk about the parameters of a safe haven law. I'm assuming that they're different state to state. Exactly what parameters would you like to see in a safe haven law, like in terms of drop-off locations, how old the baby needs to be, what is the time period that the individual, or I guess the mother, has, and if she wants to get the baby back, and so on?
Sure. I mean, we sort of have a national model through the National Safe Haven Alliance. The age of the newborn maximum, somewhere between 7 and 10 days, is really the best statute. We've seen in some states, and I'll go to states such as the ones on the southern border, where women are going back and forth across a border situation and leaving all kinds of things behind, including babies up to a month or two old. There may be instances there where something over 7 days is necessary, or 10 days. Generally, babies are abandoned within the first 7 hours of their life, and I think that's about 99% of the time. So anything around that time period is fine. As far as locations going, in some states where there's a lot more people and you have fewer rural areas, you obviously want your hospitals, because that's the best place for any baby to be delivered. But then hospitals can be 30 or 40 miles apart, so a staffed fire and staffed police station or EMS station, wherever emergency personnel and vehicles are, is obviously the next best location. And what they're going to do is they're going to call 911 and get a EMS vehicle there and get that in an ambulance, get that baby in an ambulance to the nearest possible hospital. Outside of that, we found in rural areas the best thing to also have is if somebody calls 911 and says, meet me behind the abandoned, XYZ building, and I'll give you the baby there. that's actually an extension of the police or the fire station, and in reality, just logistically, it's the best thing to do, because why take a 13 or 14-year-old who has a cell phone but doesn't have a car and doesn't have the ability to drive 15 or 20 miles to get to the nearest location, not know it, potentially get lost, potentially not know that this is a part-time hospital as opposed to someplace with a neonatal intensive care unit that may be necessary. So let the 911 responder also be a safe haven.
Well, Mike, unfortunately we're already out of time to speak with you today, but we certainly appreciate you taking some time this morning, and we look forward to hearing more on this issue as it progresses over the next year and into the legislative session.
Well, thank you.
All right, Mike Morrissey from Baby Safe Haven, New England.